You count? Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night for everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on this very special occasion where we have Dr. Olle Johansson from Sweden as our special guest. This is going to be more like an interview format. Dr. Johansson is considered one of the main authorities on the area of the studies of the effects of electromagnetic fields in the health. He is retired, but he was a very once director of a very prestigious institute called the Carolina Institute in Sweden, which is like I don't know, I consider is a national institution that does a lot of research on toxicology, health, and other things. He's also a member of the Royal Society of Electronics, I believe, from Sweden. Well, we will ask him actually a little bit more about what he has been. And for more than 30 years, he started studying this topic, and he has published more than 100 articles on the field. So thank you very much, Dr. Johansson. Well, I forgot to say you are a emeritus professor. So thank you very much for being with us. Well, you know, we are mainly people from Latin America, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Peru, Mexico. I'm from Mexico, Colombia, etc. But this is an English transmission, so welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
With us are Guillermo Bertolucci, who is from Peru, and he is, I believe he's retired as well, but he's an attorney, and he has worked on the issue of human rights, and he used to work for a UN agency. Josefa de la Puente, she's also from Peru, and she's a coach on health issues, also related with nutrition, and she's a doula. I don't know how you say it in English. Well, and I'm from Mexico, and then also with us, but you cannot see him, but behind the screen is Dr. Rodolfo Tusset, who is also an authority on the ionizing radiation, and he's from Argentina, and he belongs to the National Agency of Ionizing Radiation in Argentina, and he's also part of other international groups. So, Dr. Johansson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Josefa, do you want to start?
Well, thank you very much, Johansson, for being here. Maybe to start, you can tell us, I have this personal question too. How did you get into this field? Like, what was it that triggered that you were interested in studying electromagnetic fields? Or was it, I don't know, how did that start? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. I mean, my background is actually in basic and applied neuroscience. So I know a little bit about the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. And when I had my dissertation presented at the Karolinska Institute, and for all your listeners who don't know that, but the Karolinska Institute is the university or the institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. So it's very highly rewarded all over the world. And I was working there, and when I had my dissertation then presented, it's customary to change your line of interest to not compete with your former supervisor. So I thought that maybe leaving rodents and other experimental animals, including then rats and mice, and moving to human beings, that was a change. And by that, I immediately got into contact, of course, with a lot of clinicians who wanted to investigate various parts of the body during illness and disease and various forms of handicaps. Of course, with the normal healthy volunteers, it was impossible to ask anyone to get a piece of their heart or their brain or anything, but you could get a piece of their skin, of the oral mucosa from the mouth, and from ladies you can get a piece of the vaginal mucosa. So we got sort of a little bit boxed in from that point of view, but that turned out to be good also, because 1977 was really the first time my attention was drawn to the possibility that non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation, such as from today's cell phones and Wi-Fi routers, maybe could have a negative adverse impact on health as well as on biology. But it was not until the beginning of the 80s when I really was sort of sucked into this, and it was just pure coincidence. You see, I never listen to radio actually, and especially not when I'm trying to concentrate. And definitely that was the case at my office and the laboratory at the Karolinska Institute. But one evening when I was about to go home, someone had left the radio on in the laboratory, and I was moving towards it to turn it off and go home. But while moving, I heard a woman, and her name is Kajsa Vedin, and she worked then on the west coast of Sweden in a town called Göteborg with trade union questions and issues. And she was talking in this radio interview about people that had health issues when they had started to use the newly introduced personal computers. And when they were put in front of these visual display units, or screens as we would call them today, they got skin irritation, skin rashes, pricking pain, redness, sensation of heat, etc. Very much as if they had been out in the sun for too long time. But this was in the middle of the winter, and in Sweden, trust me, there is hardly any sun at all at that time. It's very dark and gloomy. So that was not the explanation. It was something from these new personal computers that were irritating the skin. And as I said, in the meantime, after my dissertation, we had got ourselves very much into human skin, normal, healthy skin, as well as skin from patients like psoriasis or skin tumors or whatever. So I decided that evening at 8 o'clock, while listening, because I couldn't stop listening to this lady, I decided I had to call her the day after, and so I did. And the odd thing is, that's the reason why we talk with each other this evening for me, and maybe it's afternoon for you. So had I been a little bit quicker, then I had turned the radio off and never got into this area. So I always tell my friends, when we are talking about exercise, sometimes it's good not to be too well trained. Had I been quicker, then I would have turned it off, you know. Then we did meet. Kajsa Vedin brought a physicist from Göteborg, and in Göteborg there is a very famous university of technology called Chalmers, and she brought a physicist with her, and they came to Stockholm. And that was really the start. And then after that, we continued to do studies with these people that we today would call electro-hypersensitive persons. But we also, of course, went into the much larger area of general health impacts as well as biological impacts of artificial electromagnetic fields. So that was the start.
That's a great story and a great start for such an interesting topic. And that's when you started also looking into the, how do you call the dermatitis related to electromagnetic fields? What's the actual name?
Electro hypersensitivity. But
Yeah.
at that time, we invented another term because, as I said, they had got the skin problems in front of computer screens. So we called it screen dermatitis.
Yes,
but
that one.
later on, that was changed into electro hypersensitivity, which today is the official term.
Thank you.
Well, if I may ask, then, as Laura said, I am an attorney, and I'm bound to ask you, have you looked into some violations of human rights coming from the use of this technology yourself? Have you come across, and can you tell us about it?
I'm very interested, actually, in human rights in a general sense. And of course, I have seen a lot of violations, and I still see them, and I shouldn't go too deep into this and too wide. But for instance, electro hypersensitivity is recognized here in Sweden as a disability, or nowadays it's called a functional impairment. And the thing is, if you read the United Nations texts about the human rights for people with functional impairments, there isn't any need at all for any recognition. I'm sorry, for instance, tonight that I cannot speak Spanish, Portuguese, or any other language related to Central and South America, but I just cannot, because I cannot speak any of these languages or understand that. And that's a definition of a functional impairment. So it's only myself who decides whether I can speak Spanish or not. You cannot decide that, and no one else can decide that. And the United Nations puts a lot of pressure to this, that any functional impairment, it's personal and private. But I see so often, every day, I would say, violations of this, and especially from the medical corps with medical doctors who think that they should decide if Olle Johansson can speak Spanish or if someone is electro-hypersensitive. And of course, that's a strong violation of the human rights charters from the UN. So yes, I do see it quite often. And also very many people, they travel all the way from their home countries to Stockholm just to sit down with me. And then we go through in detail what they should think about, how they should act, and so on. But of course, when they come back to their home countries, maybe they have all the authorities, the parliament, the government, the medical establishment against them. So it could be very, very tough to voice that they are electro-hypersensitive or any other such functional impairment.
Well, in most of Latin American legislations, the functional impairment is not recognized as derived from electromagnetic hypersensitivity. So that's why I was asking, because we are bound to feel those effects more and more. And in some cases, it violates also the right to work, the right to health, the right to other constitutional rights. So,
yes, indeed. And also, don't forget children and teenagers
yes.
who should be thrown out of schools because they just cannot be there any longer. And again, as I said, this is a very strong violation of the UN Special Human Rights Act for people with functional impairments. And also, I always ask people, I'm often invited to give lectures, for instance, at senates or parliaments or governments, and I ask them, what should you do if a person would come here to your country from Sweden, being electro-hypersensitive? What would you do with that person? Should you throw him or her into jail, or should you shoot them, or what should you do? Or should you follow the UN texts as Sweden is doing,
Yes.
And then I could tell you, they always look, how should I say, they look stressed and ashamed. And especially if you ask them, just imagine that we are talking about your husband or your wife or your children. How should you then meet them out at the airport in the capital of your country?
Mhm. Yeah,
And
that's a very important point. Yes.
then they look even more stressed and ashamed, you know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we have maybe now Dr. Tusset can ask a question. Dr. Tusset?
Okay, I don't know if you see me, but you heard me, okay?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Taking the subject you have just speak on, the human rights, one of the big human rights is to keeping the planet alive, to keeping the planet existing, you know. And you know that one of the most problems of the non-cable communication is because they produce a big impact on the climate change because the production, because the cost of energy is 10 times higher than the cable one. And then we know that just in Swedish there is a big personality on climate change, that is Greta Thunberg. And then I suppose you can working together because both are working on the same way, because to keep the planet running and to keep life in the planet, because if we continue to use the inalambric communication, the temperature of the planet will be going higher and higher, and Swedish and all our country has signed the Paris agreement that compromise everybody to keep the temperature no more than 1 degree and a half in the next 30 years. And then I believe that you can working together with the people defending, you know, the climate change. What do you can comment that?
It's actually extremely important what you say now. And let me first say that to keep the planet well and healthy, I don't think that's a human right. That's a human obligation. And therefore, I agree with you. Greta Thunberg and others with her around the world are doing fantastic job. And it's odd that you mentioned this, because yesterday evening, I quoted her in an economic article exactly about what you are saying now. So you're really nailing the head of the nail here, you know. Yes, that would be definitely a very important way forward. And I have contemplated sometimes to try to seek some kind of contact with her, but we haven't done it yet. But maybe with this article that soon will be published, I hope, maybe that could be like a key to open a door to her work as well. So yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another person in the studio. He's Rodrigo Jaimes. He's from Colombia. He's physician, I believe. So well, I'm a biologist.
Engineer. An
From
engineer.
the technical part. I don't know if Rodrigo, can you make a question, but I cannot activate his microphone. Otherwise, I will go. Okay, we'll let him on for the next round. So, Dr. Johansson, so well, you already comment some of the effects of the radio magnetic fields or electromagnetic fields. But since you're a neurologist, can you tell us a little bit more? Why is it affecting, like, and why it is important to be conscious, aware, and why the politicians should do something about it?
Okay, that's a very good question. And to begin with, I'm not a clinical neurologist, but I'm a neuroscientist. But still, I mean, the impact on various organs of the human body, of animals, impact on plants and bacteria. There is an overwhelming number of published scientific articles pointing to the necessity to immediately act and react, I would say. And for me, it has been for the last decades an ongoing question mark in my head. Why, for instance, politicians, civil servants, and others in most countries and in most situations haven't reacted at all. They just look aside and keep on with whatever they are doing. And of course, being sort of a mental fire brigade soldier, if you call me like that, I want it to be a false alarm. I want everything to sort of just disappear and that people could happily continue using their cell phones, using their laptops, the wireless smart meters, the wireless baby alarms, and so on. But that would mean that maybe 30, 35, 40, 50,000 publications all must be wrong at the same time. And that has never, ever happened before in human history. And the probability is zero for that, basically. Some studies can be wrong, I agree. But today, you know, the number of replications and additions and so on is really building an enormous wall and telling the politicians and civil servants all over the world, you have to act and react here. And I often get the question, well, do we really need to pay any attention to all these publications? And then I counter with a question. And I say, may I ask you a question instead? I don't answer, but I ask you a question. Yes, people say, do you then think there is a single insurance or reinsurance company in the world that covers health damage from artificial electromagnetic fields? And they realize there is none. So the insurance and reinsurance companies, they have done their homework, and actually they did it more than 20, 25 years ago. I remember, for instance, a conference in London in 2002, that's nearly 20 years ago. And then the representatives, like from Lloyd's UK, which is the largest insurance dealer in the world, representatives of Swiss Re, which is the largest reinsurance dealer, and so on, they all said that for them there was not a question whether these artificial electromagnetic radiation signals were dangerous or not. They already knew they were dangerous. The only question for them was, who is going to pay for all of the damages in the future? And they didn't want to do that. So therefore, they formally have bailed out from any form of liability or responsibility, which they are allowed to do. Insurance and reinsurance companies are private, and they could do whatever they want to. They decide what and who they will insure, and they could live by that. And therefore, they have a rather short list of exemptions, and one of them is health effects of electromagnetic fields, all categories. So that's, in a way, more telling than all the studies that we can talk about for weeks and months and maybe years, with all the details, all the test tubes, all the experimental animals, all the observations, all the micrography and so on. But they have already done that work and decided, no, we will not come close to this issue at all. So that's very telling. And Americans often say, always follow the money, then you get the answers. And I guess this is true here once again.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
No, thank you for that. You mentioned that civil servants do not want to continue with this issue. Why would you think that is?
I mean, if you look in science history, you know, there are a lot of examples where money has ruled, where profit and greed has gone over the health of the planet, of animals, of plants, humans, bacteria. And I hope 2021 that we are a little bit smarter so we don't sell out life on the planet just for a toy. Because after all, if we should be a little bit sharp here, cell phones, Wi-Fi routers, and so on, they are not life necessities. They are toys. They are very fun, they are very useful, and so on. But if they are dangerous to life, we need to come up with alternative solutions. We have already mentioned the introduction of, for instance, cable fiber optics as a much more both economically viable system, but also a system that doesn't carry such an impact on the general environment. And there are solutions at the same time. And there are companies around the world right now coming up with sort of small solutions to various problems. So I think you will see a change in the market, and people will start asking for what I call human and environmental friendly technology. And of course, the producers, the manufacturers of such technology will make a huge profit tomorrow, but they didn't do that yesterday. And I think maybe that, I mean, the civil servants, they are under the pressure, of course, of their politicians in each country. And the politicians, they look at probably, I would say, the biggest cash flow cow ever on this planet. And they want to milk every dollar out of it. And that's the same for the manufacturers. That's the same for the operators of telecom systems and so on. They want to get a lot of profit. And it's up to the citizens of each country to knock on the doors of the both the civil servants, but particularly the politicians. And we have done that here in Sweden. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven, and his ministers and others completely turned their back on us. So again, I hope that they know something that we don't know, making these issues irrelevant. I have actually written to governments here in Sweden asking them for the documentation proving that I'm wrong, that all the systems are safe. And so far, I haven't received a single letter, not a comma, not a period, nothing. So it's not so impressive. And people around me always say, no, Olle, you are not wrong. That's obvious when you look into the science, all the scientific articles and so on. But for some reason, the politicians and their helpers, the civil servants and so on, they just don't want to listen, or maybe they are not allowed to listen because, as you know, in every country, above your government and above your parliament, you have the finance sector and the industry who are the ones actually running the show.
Yeah, Laura had a comment. You had your mic off, Laura.
Sorry, sorry. On that line, I wanted to ask you if you have any comment on a very recent announcement that the European Commission registered a citizen initiative that is called Stay Connected but Protected.
Yeah, I know the people behind that initiative very well. and I certainly wish them good luck. They have asked me to write some sort of supporting letter, which I will do. And so, yes, that's very important, but it's just a registration yet. They need to collect, I think it's 1 million signatures from at least 7 different European Union countries. And from what I understand, that's quite heavy work, but it needs to be done. And then they can force the European Union to take these questions into consideration. And I hope, really hope, that they will succeed. But I know it will start early next year. So the registration is just the first small, important, but small step yet.
Yeah, well, thank you. And you mentioned also the number of signatures that are bound or that are needed to continue this complaint before the European Union. But what I have seen is that most people would want better connection. And in fact, I know somebody who is a very important person here in my country that was once in the University of Wisconsin, and he was very happy to see that the whole city was live, as he mentioned it. The whole city was connected through Wi-Fi. So if you ask most people, they would prefer to have better connection rather than to look for their own health. So this is going to be a task that is uphill. What are your comments about it?
It's a very, very clear comment of yours. And here in Sweden, the situation is the same. I don't have any real figures, but my guess would be that probably more than 99.5% of the consumers, they want to have more, better, faster, more, better, faster, you know. So they don't give a toss about their health from that point of view. And that's surprising because here in Sweden, there is quite a media coverage after all, and has been for many years. So people are informed about that there are possible health as well as biological implications. And if you allow me, I will just give you a short story, which I think is illustrative. A year ago, a little bit more, it was in March 2020. I was going with one of the commuter trains here in Stockholm. And since no one knows who I am, I always take the opportunity to educate people and inform. And right across from me was a very posh lady in my same age. And she was fiddling around with her smartphone. So I leaned forward and said, "Sorry that I disturb you, but do you know that the World Health Organization in Geneva in Switzerland has cancer classified the electromagnetic radiation that is coming from your cell phone?" And she went ballistic. You know, she got so angry with me and told me to go to some very warm place and mind my own business. And I didn't know anything what I was talking about. And she was really yelling at me. And I said, please, stop. You have a smartphone, so you have Google. Couldn't you please Google the words WHO, brain tumor, and cell phone? And she did. And she went silent for 3-4 minutes. And then she slowly looked up and said, I'm sorry. It's all here. You were right. And now I get angry again, she said, but not on you, but on my own parliament, government, and health authorities here in Sweden. Why have they not informed me about this? You see, I'm not only a mother, I'm also a grandmother. And last week, I bought a new cell phone for my 12-year-old granddaughter, and now I regret it. And I said to her, well, maybe you have to write, for instance, to the prime minister or the government or something. And then, unfortunately, I had to leave the commuter train. So I don't know how the story sort of ended or what she decided to do. But you see, information is always important. And so if you have the chance to inform and educate people, And as you know, on the internet, there is a lot of information that is very valid and very relevant. And even if they just read a few lines, then they start to get interested. And as in this case with the granddaughter, they have a focal point in their own private life, which could be very important for them to adhere to. So I think information is crucial. And of course, as you probably know, the #1 country here is actually Italy, I would say, because in 2019, the Supreme Court, early in 2019, demanded the parliament and government to inform all Italians about health effects of electromagnetic fields, like from cell phones and Wi-Fi routers, and they did. So when I came to Italy the same year in November 2019, and I went to Rome to lecture for their parliament, but then I had also agreed to continue my journey southbound from Rome to other towns in Italy to meet people, for instance, with electron hypersensitivity. And I had a train ticket from Stazione Termini in Rome, and I went there to catch the train, but I was a little bit thirsty. So I sat down at a coffee shop, and there was a teenage boy with an excellent English, and he served me, and we started to talk a little bit. And soon I thought, and I didn't say anything, I just thought that, wow, he knows a lot about these questions. Electromagnetic fields, impact on human health and so on. That's unusual. Then it turned out that, for instance, the staff on the train, they also knew a lot about that. And then I remembered, yeah, the government and parliament and their authorities have handed out information to every Italian. They know. And in Sweden, I could tell you, if we would ask anyone at the coffee shop, they wouldn't know anything. Train staff, nothing. Because here there is no real information from the central bodies of the Swedish society. In media, yes, but as you know, people are more occupied with sensations and gossip and so on, celebrities, than with real information. So you have to kind of tug to people and hug them and say, now you stop, now you listen, and just give them a few lines, as I say, a few picks, and often in a question form, as I did. Do you know that the World Health Organization and so on? Then people start to think.
Well, thank you. Quite interesting. Josefa, you have a question?
Yes. Talking about talking to people, what do you think are the effects on human health or on environmental health that are most important to you or most impacting? Like, what are, we have reproduction, we have cancer.
Yeah.
What do you think like really gets you worried in a way?
Yeah, that's actually rather easy to answer. Of course, for instance, impacts on the human brain resulting in decreased concentration capacity, decreased memory, decreased learning capabilities. That's not good. And that may be the reason why, for instance, China is actively banning cell phones and laptops and so on from their schools and classrooms. And as you know, China has a very simple business model. They just want to buy everything, including South America and Central America and Sweden and so on. And of course, to do that, then they need to have sharp brains, very well educated people. And they cannot risk to have a reduction in concentration or memory capacity. So that's important. Then impacts on the immune system, of course. Also, when it comes to fertility, here in Europe, for instance, and I know it's the same in the United States, there is a very dramatic reduction in male sperm quality. And when scientists have done experiments exposing sperm cells to cell phones, the implication was clear-cut. They should not be in contact with each other, So you have definitely an impact that is of great importance. Then also all effects relating to other animals, for instance, pollinators, including honeybees, wasps, bumblebees, and so on. Very, very important and scary, to say the least. We are trying to get people to support our research in this particular area because it really impacts everyone on this planet. And so far, we haven't really succeeded. There are supporters, but there are very few, and the amount of money is just too small. So if you can find people that would be interested to help us, please do, because that's very important. And finally, what really keeps me awake and really worries me are studies done by several laboratories. I will mention one American group, namely Tahiri and co-workers, who in 2017 published a study where they had exposed ordinary bacteria that we all have on us and in us right now. And they exposed them to the second generation mobile telephony, what we call GSM, and then also to modern Wi-Fi routers. And to make a long story short, they didn't see very much apart from one thing, and that's the thing that keeps me awake. The bacteria became antibiotic resistant. The very same year, 2017, completely without knowing about each other, the G20 countries had a special meeting in Europe only about the fact that in Europe, more than 25,000 people die a premature death because of antibiotic resistance in healthcare. And it was said that by 2050, it could be in the order of 10 million people all around the planet dying too soon because of antibiotic resistance. If you take Tahiri and the G20 countries and allow them to meet and talk to each other, then by 2050, the 10 million people could easily be 7.7 billion people, because then everyone would be at jeopardy, because then everyone could die from a splinter in their thumb, as people did in the 1900th century. And I called some physicians. I have a relative who is an orthopedic surgeon, and I asked her, what do you say about this? And she was shocked and said at the same time, this is a huge issue already in healthcare. We are not allowed to go public and talk about this, but someone somewhere needs to come up with a new form of antibiotics, because the number of people dying too soon is increasing by the year. So it's a big, big thing in clinical science, and that keeps me awake, and especially since there are other groups who have shown very much the same results. So we have that on our research agenda as well, but well, it's not easy. I could send you, after this interview, I could send you a link to a page where people could donate. And of course, if people around the world would donate just $1, or even $0.50 or $0.25, that would make a huge difference. But then everyone needs to step up and do it. And so far, we haven't succeeded really.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Maybe
Send us a link.
If you, I don't know if you can access a commentary box, you could put it there so that people who are watching now, they can watch it now. Otherwise, you can send it to Aline and we will share it among our network.
Maybe I do it afterwards so I don't mess up anything.
Okay.
I'm so bad with computers, so probably I will do something wrong then,
Okay. So maybe Dr. Toussaint, do you have another question? Maybe we are about to finish, but Dr. Toussaint, then me, and then final remarks. He's there, I think. Rodolfo?
Yes.
Well,
¿Me escuchas?
Sí, ahora sí. Yes, now we
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay. Well, I can ask you some question. You know, there are maybe two different fields: the field of science and the field of decision and implementation and using of tools to maybe the corrective actions derived from science. And then Swedish, your country, is a very special one. You have, of course, many clever and relevant scientists as you and Hardel and so on. And also, you have data. You have statistical official data on how the cancer was increased at the same time that the use of cellular sound was also increased. And you have another thing very important, because Leonard Hardel has demonstrated using the 9 principles of Sir Bradford Hill, and they do it just in the forum in London of the Bradford Hill. They demonstrate the causality of them. And then you have the data, you have the capable people, and you have demonstrated very clearly, and Hardel is not any person, he's just an expert of the IARC, okay? And also Christophe Portier has also demonstrated. And then our question is, for us, that we have not this statistical, we have not this such a people, how can we win? Because you have you know, a Swedish radiological safety authority that is maybe infected by some ICNIRP members, no? But why don't you win? Why the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority don't take the right decision? You know, maybe you have used a wrong strategy. Maybe we will change the strategy for the future. It's very important for us, because we have not your people, we have not your statistic, we have not demonstrated as you have did. Then if you don't win, we will never win. You understand?
You know, I love that question and comment. And I could tell you, some years ago, I collected together with a friend, 20, 25 people. We sat down and formed like a think tank, or whatever you would like to call it. And we said, we need to change the direction and the strategy and tactics. And people in this group included members of the parliament. There were journalists, reporters, writers, filmmakers, scientists, everyone, a priest, and every person of society, really. And we set out and said, wow, now we are going to look for other strategies. And the aim was to impact the general population, the general group of citizens in Sweden primarily, but also elsewhere, and also reach to the politicians and people in power. And we worked very hard for a few years. And I'm sorry to tell you, we completely failed. We got a very good friendship, and we got to know each other and had a very good and productive time, but we didn't move an inch closer to reaching the consumers, the citizens, or the politicians. So, wow, if you or anyone listening now could come up with a new strategy and new tactics, I would be so very, very happy, because you're right, it is needed. And you know, the win, it doesn't have to be sort of very dramatic in a sense, because as I said previously, what I introduced many years ago was the idea that we need to come up with what I called then the tomorrow's green human and environmentally friendly technology. And any company that comes up with such a new cell phone or computer or power line or whatever that doesn't harm the planet will, of course, have a big seller. They would cover the whole market with their product. So it could be also a great asset for any company. And of course, as a Swede, I want it to be Swedish companies who will be at the forefront. And you want to have, of course, Central American or South American companies. I don't give a toss who does it, just it's needed to be done. And as I said, I see that people are traveling along these routes, but it takes time, and still the sort of giants in this field like Huawei, Samsung, and so on, they are blanketing the whole market still. And we need to come up with some other solution or some other need for the general population. And I'm sorry to say we haven't succeeded very well, but we haven't given up. We want to try to continue this fight, And so let's see for the future. Maybe I have to move to Argentina or Bolivia or Uruguay or Brazil or Mexico. I don't know. But somewhere there will be a focal point. I'm sure about that. And of course, your scientists may come up with such solutions, so they have to also travel to Stockholm for their Nobel Prizes. So you never know.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for this comment. So well, we've been talking about many things, and you mentioned the importance of information, actually the duty of the government to ask and demand the companies to inform consumers about the real.
Could I stop you?
Yes.
It's not the obligation of the companies. Information in a democracy is only the obligation of the parliament/government and their authorities.
Okay.
It can never be handed to a commercial entity, because then you don't know at all where it will end. And they didn't do that in Italy. They kept their hand on the information, and the government and their authorities and the parliament, they did the job. And I think that's very important that it is an independent entity. Otherwise, and I have to say this, otherwise the commercial side could forget to say some things or hide some things and so on. And you cannot have that in a democracy. So don't go down that avenue, Demand that your own elected officials should do their job for you.
Okay. So is the
And
duty...
could I interrupt you again?
Sure.
Because also in many countries, you may have a situation that is not favorable for such a solution. And then you have to do what I do always, wherever I go in the world, lean forward, tell the taxi driver or the bus driver or the servant at a restaurant, whatever, ask them questions. Do you know? Have you heard? And so on, just to plant seeds into their brain so they start thinking, because they have husbands, they have wives, they have children, they have dogs and cats, and they need to be activated.
Okay. So what I understand, because it's the duty of our authorities to protect us, and not only us but the environment, right? And there is also like a lot of saying about labeling, like not only SARS but other more, provide consumers with more information. So what I'm hearing is, well, what I will say, is also their duty. It's kind of like the charge of the proof. Like they have to, otherwise the government will have to invest a lot of money, and the ones that are making the profit are the industries, the business. So they also should, or at least they should pay more to the government, so that the government provides everybody with the information. And I understand you within independent and right information. I understand what you say about like the bias and how they display the information. But okay, having said that, well, not only in Mexico, I think everywhere in the world now, we are going later than you, but in Latin America, 5G is starting to be implemented. So we are behind you, fortunately, and we are it's starting to roll out. And so what would you comment about that? We have actually done some demonstrations, and we have done this type of talks, trying to explain and tell people what we know about the effects of 5G, which is a specific, right? Or you could even say it's a wider spectrum, no? But we will not go on the technicals. So what would you tell our audience about 5G? And I don't know, what suggestions would you make to us?
Well, I would say like this, as you indicated, 5G, the 5th generation mobile telephony, is technically very different to the previous versions, but we are still talking about colossal exposures of everything and everyone in our societies, in our countries, from microwaves and other types of electromagnetic fields. And that's the question. And don't forget that even if you roll out 5G, you have so many other sources still. Like in Sweden, we still use the 2nd generation, the 3G, the 4G, and then a lot of other wireless systems, including wireless internet, Wi-Fi, and so on. So it's a much broader question. And I see in some countries, people are very much focused only on 5G, which you risk to come out in a less serious way, because they often get the question, well, why shouldn't we stop 4G then? And then they have no answers. So I think one should think very sort of detailed about where should we put our force and what do we want to achieve. And also, I see very often people want to have like safer technology, and at least in Swedish language, the word safer doesn't mean anything. Either a technique is safe or it's not safe. There is nothing in between there, you see. So again, I think one should be very cautious how you address these issues. And also, one thing I often come across is that when people stand up, like you mentioned, the demonstration, I was rather recently in 2019, I think it was, at a demonstration in Copenhagen in Denmark, and people were protesting against 5G particularly, but all kinds of radiation. But everyone in the audience were at the same time using their cell phones to film the event. And of course, for journalists and reporters, they love this, because then they could take one single photograph and say they protest against something they actually use. So again, it's important to be strategic and tactic, and really boil down. And I often ask people, what do you want? And they have a hard time to really describe that. And then I say, you have to go back to your house and continue thinking, and then you can come out again. And then you should answer my question, what do you actually want? It's extremely important, because, you know, the other side, if we call it like that, for instance, the industry, the finance sector, politicians and so on, they're not stupid. They're extremely highly educated and very smart. And they need to hear from the population what they actually want. And if they feel they could fix it, then they will rush back, because it's always a competition. If not this company does it, then that company will do it and gain the market shares. So it's a very razor sharp competition between companies. So, and I could tell you right now, there are companies in a whole lot of sectors trying to come up with low and safe radiation solutions. So it's coming things, but they need your support in the form of what exactly do you want?
Thank you very much. Well, I think we can start closing up. So if you don't mind, we will do a last round. Hopefully will be quick, well, questions quick to answer, because I bet you are a little bit tired now.
No, that's all right. It's
right?
only 9:40 p.m. here, so it's still early evening, you know.
Okay, and I know you Swedes drink a lot of good coffee.
Yes.
Maybe produced in our lands.
Yes, you are so right. And I want to say to all the coffee making people, you know, the workers, thank you. I'm a real coffee lover. And Colombian coffee, for instance, is top notch here in Sweden. And of course, also from other countries like in Africa, Ethiopian coffee and so on, you know.
Good to know that. I used to do work with organic coffee producers. So even if you don't drink Mexican coffee, I will let them know that you know, people are appreciating.
I do drink Mexican coffee too, you know. Yes.
Okay. Well, so Josefa, maybe you want to do your last question or comment.
Maybe what would you say to electro-hypersensitive people? I mean, many of us are always looking, you know, for different therapies, for different ways to being better. Maybe the question would be on that line, on what they can do to feel better, but also maybe in a broader sense. I don't know how you would like to.
Well, again, I would say it's a rather easy question to answer, but it could be hard to achieve what people are looking for. Very often, people have a hard time really to vocalize exactly what they want to have. I mean, if you want to have a cup of coffee, I want to hear you say that. Not talking like, well, you know, I wonder, do they have coffee over there and so on, you know, because then people might not understand that you want to have a cup of coffee now, you know. And I think persons with electrohypersensitivity, what they should ask for, and now I quote the UN Special Human Rights Act for people with functional impairments, is to live an equal life in a society based on equality. So very simple, so very straightforward. And that's all. And they should be able to go to the cinema or work or go to school or travel in the underground or buses or whatever without any problems. So that's what they would ask for. And it's easy for me to say it, but it could be very hard to achieve it in a given country. I'm not pointing at any country in the world now, but it could be hard to achieve it. Here in Sweden, the situation is somewhat easier because it is an officially recognized impairment to begin with. The Society for the Electrohypersensitive People get the governmental subsidy, which is equally as big as any handicap group, and they are actively being met in a much better way than in other countries. But it took like 20 years or more to achieve that. So it's a long way, but don't give up, and always be very, very clear exactly what you want. And I think that sentence, to live an equal life in a society based on equality, that is so right to the point, and it summarizes everything. And then practically it may take time until you have fixed everything. I understand that. You know, in the meantime, I should just tell everyone that is listening that now I have found this donation page. So I will send it in the chat as well. There it went away. So if people want to help us, and no gift is too small. Believe me, no gift is too small. And also, may I add to the question about electron hypersensitivity, and to the listeners, we talked about that before the program started. It could be a good idea to invite, for instance, myself or someone else that is well acquainted with all the details regarding electron hypersensitivity as a functional impairment. I should also place a word of warning. There are a few physicians in the world who want to medicalize electron hypersensitivity, to turn it into a disease. And I'm not in favor of that. Definitely not, because then you move people with electron hypersensitivity into the medical diagnostic sector, and then there is only one step left to move them into the psychiatric sector. And there are a number of persons who want to psychiatricalize electro hypersensitivity, meaning it's just in your head. It's nothing wrong with your cell phone or with the cell towers or with the computers or anything. It's just in your head. So don't go down that avenue.
Yes, Arthur Firstenberg, in his book, he says he doesn't like the term electrohypersensitivity because it's not the person who is the problem, but the cell phone or the technology that is the problem, right?
Well,
in the meaning.
Yeah, I could in a way understand, but at the same time, no. If you see a giraffe, call it a giraffe, even if you don't understand why it's called a giraffe.
Yes.
Because it's important to stick to the nomenclature. So even if we are in Singapore or in Australia or in Norway, whatever, everyone should recognize the term electron hypersensitivity, and then it's correct. It is a functional impairment due to an inferior environment. And the United Nations stresses this enormously, that a person, for instance, in a wheelchair is not sick. It's the environment who has to be fixed. The obstacles are in the environment. If you come with a wheelchair and you have stairs, you need a wheelchair ramp.
Yes.
Maybe you need kneeling buses, you need faced-off sidewalks and so on. And do not forget another very important point that also is made in this research sector of handicaps and impairments and disabilities. When you adopt a society for a specific group of handicapped people, then the numerically big winners is everyone. And I often tell the story that I used to wait for my, unfortunately now, ex-wife, but we waited for each other at the same corner in Stockholm, close to the concert hall. And there is a faced-off sidewalk. During 33 years, I never saw anyone in a wheelchair. And I know they use it, but I never saw anyone. But I saw people with a bicycle, with a shopping cart, with a baby pram and so on. Everyone will use the faced-off sidewalk. So if we would make society accessible for everyone with electron hypersensitivity, the big winners would be guys like me. I'm not electron hypersensitive, but I wouldn't get, as you mentioned, a brain tumor, maybe. I wouldn't get a neurological damage, a learning deficit, an impact on the immune system, because we would have lowered the exposure down to a level where it doesn't impact people with electron hypersensitivity, and maybe all of us will be winners from a health point of view.
That is a great way to look at it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay, if I may ask one last question then. You just mentioned the UN text on functional impairments, but at the same time, you mentioned in a previous answer or in a previous comment the WHO. And I was wondering, ICNIRP, which is an NGO working for the WHO and which is setting the limits for exposure to radiation, wouldn't you find a contradiction in terms on the position of the UN with the document on functional impairments and that issued by ICNIRP and the limits of radiation to be exposed? Or the limits?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. There is definitely big question marks here, but I think the problem is only really the ICNIRP. The UN texts, when you read them, then you see that, wow, they are good. When you look on the World Health Organization and what they do, they mostly are very right. But the ICNIRP, well, they need to go back and redo their homework and come up with biological safety guidelines. And to the best of my knowledge, only once has there been a serious attempt to point to such a hygienic and law-abiding safety level for public exposure, and that is from 1997. It was done in Stockholm at the trade union meeting when I said that the only safe level that I can see as a scientist is to go back to the natural background. And then I remember there was a very fierce opponent who had ridiculed me in public and so on. And he stood up and said the following: you know, I never agree with Olle Johansson, but this time he's dead right. So I felt very happy when he said that. Unfortunately, the year after, 1998, then ICNIRP came with its guidelines. And I remember that I had to call a colleague at the Royal Institute of Technology, which is the big university for technology in Stockholm, and they are associated with the Nobel Prizes in chemistry and physics. And I talked to this colleague and said, hey, I'm going to send you a paper written by an organization which is called ICNIRP, and could you please check it, because it looks as if they are suggesting that we should allow an exposure level which is in the order of a quintillion times above the natural background, that is 10 up to the power 18, a 1 with 18 zeros, higher. And I must misunderstand, I say, it sounds very, very odd. And he said, yeah, I could read it. He came back after like a week and said, no, you are right. That's exactly what they suggest. And of course, you just cannot imagine how they arrived at this conclusion. And it is a very, very painful reminder that different organizations around the world may be, should we say, infected by other ideas and companies and so on, you know, commercial greeds and money and etc. And I think that's the case here. And therefore, there has been a very strong movement for quite a number of years to come up with biological-based exposure standards. And we're still lacking that, but I say again, I'm proud of having named the hygienic safety level, and that is still only the natural background. Meaning, in practical terms, we have to turn everything off until we can take down the red flag and raise a green flag and say, now it's okay.
So that's the precautionary principle that you're calling for.
That's the precautionary principle indeed. And it's very important to follow that. And I have written so many papers and so many commentaries, and I appeared, as you know, giving lectures and interviews, etc. And I always come back to this, that we need to do this, and we need to do it now, actually.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, before it's too late, right? So we have a question from the public. We actually,
Yeah.
Fabiano, who you might know from Brazil, and you had another interview previously. And his question is, what do you think is the future of ICNIRP? And I believe this also follows, considering that recently there have been a lot of articles and publications showing how ICNIRP has a lot of conflict of interest, and it's capture. Well, it's not an agency, but it's, yeah, conflict of interest. So
Yeah.
what do you think will happen?
I mean, I agree 200% with that comment. And we need a very big vacuum cleaner to clean up. And I don't see really any future for ICNIRP as it is today. It needs to be put away, and a new organization has to be started. And that organization should only be looking at life on this planet, not on greed, but only on need, nothing else. So that's the short answer.
Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Tusset, Rodolfo, your last question or comment?
Okay, thank you very much, Ole, and then we will keep sure in the future. We are just working inside the Radiation Protection Association, and we are working on the last ICNIR principles released in the 2020 that are very, very important because they accept to accomplish the ICRP criteria. And then we are forcing now to use the justification criteria. That is the more important thing. And then you know that the ICNIRP has recognized that we must use those, not just exposure levels, those levels. That is writing. And then we are using that, and then we are preparing a document that we will translate to English, and then we will work together with the Radiation Protection Society. And then you have not a Swedish, but you have a Nordic Society of Radiation Protection that is very important. And then, well, we can, because you know that the ICNIRP is an excerpt of the IRPA. IRPA has created in 1992, and IRPA has created the ICNIRP, but to follow the ICRP principles, and they don't do it. And the ICNIRP has created to consult all the Radiation Protection Society before release any guideline. They don't do it.
No.
Then,
I know. Yeah.
because all this history, we have forced last year, we have forced very forward, and then at the end, ICNIRP has accepted and then released this ICNIRP principle that, of course, we are using. And we use the ICNIRP principles to change the future. That's the things. Okay. Thank you very much, Olaf.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And we have talked a lot about, in different situations, for instance, the importance of dose and other criteria and characters of physical exposure. But from a medical point of view, those are really details. What I want to see, and my peers, is any form of gadget that is safe. When I am asked, for instance, about from parents, very often they asked me, this particular cell phone or this computer or this Wi-Fi router, is it safe for my kid? And I have to always say, no, I cannot tell you it's safe. We need something else. So that's what I would like to see. And of course, the work of the ICNIRP and other organizations is extremely important, no question about it. But when you have the gadget on the shelf in a store, then people should be feeling safe that, yes, I could buy this coffee from Mexico, or I could buy these peas from Norway, or this cell phone from Korea without any health hazard for me or my children. And today they cannot. So I think there is still quite a way to go, but your work is extremely important.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, the same, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johansson. In the sake of time, I will not have a last question, but I will do one from the public again.
Yeah.
And this is, do you know any case of individual suing a telecom company for injury caused by EMF in the world? And I know there is a yes.
I don't know about any such case, and the telecom companies are not the target. To begin with, it's not only the insurance and reinsurance companies who has bailed out. Also, the operators and the manufacturers have left the ship many, many years ago. So that's a complete waste of time to even try. And I see that international lawyers, they are not directing their cases towards the production line, but they're aiming at the country's government, parliament, senate, health authorities. Those are the ones who has allowed the technology in your country, and they cannot bail out. But it has also, what should I say, a grim consequence, because when a Swede, for instance, would sue the Swedish government I have paid for. So the person is actually asking money and compensation from himself or from herself. But that can be solved, of course, easily if the governments and parliaments could stand up and just say, we need to tax these companies much tougher. Then they will get a lot of money from their revenues, and they could use that for compensation. But many governments and parliaments seems to be cowards, I will call it. They don't do what they are have to do, really. So therefore, in the end, maybe all the compensations will be drawn from taxpayers' money. And in business, there is a very good summary. I said before, when in doubt, always follow the money. That's one such saying. Another one is, companies take the profit, society take the cost. So that could very well be so in this case too. But I wouldn't waste any time at all on any telecom giant. That's completely waste of time,
Okay. I remember one of the chapters of late lessons of early warnings. I believe is by Dr. Harder. Talks about employees that had to be compensated, but I believe it was a company who hired them, and because they were heavy cell phone users. So it was not the cell phone company, but I don't know, let's say X business.
Yeah.
So yeah, the liability, I think you mentioned it before, the companies have been very clever on how to deflect liability. They are not responsible, and I think we saw that as well. It's not that I know that much, but in the US, right, with their law, with their act,
yeah,
the Telecommunication Act,
yeah,
that is taking a lot of yeah, it's basically it's working for the company somehow.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, from a legal point of view, I don't think the manufacturers or the operators have actually done anything illegal, because what they have done is that they have gone to countries, to the governments and parliaments, asking them, is it all right to blanket your country with this form of telecommunication exposure? And the governments and parliaments have said, oh, yeah, that's what we want to. We have decided here in the European Union, for instance, that we should roll out 3G, 4G, 5G. So yeah, we want to have it. And then you cannot come later on and say, oh, now we must have some compensation from you because this guy got a brain tumor or whatever. It's really up to the country itself. And the companies all over the world in all sectors have learned their lesson, especially from the tobacco scandal. So nowadays, when I talk to, prosecutors, lawyers, barristers, and so on, they always say there is just no chance to bring a company to court any longer. They know exactly how to close rank and protect themselves. So it's much better to go against the parliament, the government, the authorities.
The authority issuing the permission to allow for the implementation of that technology.
Yeah, for instance, yeah. And in Sweden, that would be, for instance, the Swedish Radiation Protection Authority, and you have the health and well-being and so on. There are a lot of different ones that have been asked, and they, oh yeah, we want to have this. This is good. This is really good. So they are the ones that you should put up against the wall in a court of law.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Johansson, thank you very much. I don't know if you have any last remarks, any tips, anything you want to share with us?
Well, only that it was a tremendous honor to appear this evening. I'm very happy and I'm very thankful for all your expert questions and comments. It's much easier to be an expert when you are too, So thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's been very interesting talking to you, and thank you very much for your insights and your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's an
Thank you.
honor. Thank you
And
very
we will
much.
be in touch with you and see if there is a chance to have you in our different countries.
Oh,
In
that
flesh.
would be fantastic, because, the general audience at such meetings, they always have fantastic questions and they cover a lot of details. And for me as a scientist, I learn a lot at every such occasion. So that I would look forward to. And now I also sent you the link that you can also post if you want to. And if
Yeah.
people would like to help us, please do.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are
Okay.
putting it now, honeywire.org/research.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.